Okay, so today we're going to be working on converting between fractions and decimals. Before we really get into operations with fractions like we did with decimals, we're going to be working with changing between the two different forms of fractions and decimal. A thing to keep in mind is changing a fraction to a decimal is kind of like how when we work with changing your grades. So here's an example in the book. When you order a sandwich meat at a deli, you may ask for a half a pound. The scale at the deli often use decimal measures. You can convert between fractions and decimal to make sure you are receiving the correct amount. Okay. Converting a fraction to a decimal. This is pretty basic. I'm not going to make you write this down because we're going to practice a lot. But to convert a fraction to a decimal, you basically divide the top number by the bottom number. In other words, you divide the numerator by the denominator. There's going to be two types of decimal we're going to be looking at today. It's going to be terminating decimal, which means the decimal that stops, and then the repeating decimals. Decimals where there's either one number or a chunk or a block of digits that repeat. So the first example we're going to look at is to convert 1/4 into a decimal. I'm going to show you the long way, and then I'm going to show you the way that I want you to focus on, which is on using the calculator. So to convert 1/4 into a decimal, for example, if you took a Friday quiz and there was 4 points on the quiz and you only earned 1 out of 4, so it should look something like this. To convert this into decimal, like I said, you need to divide the top number by the bottom number, which means it looks something like this. You can't really divide 1 by 4 because there's not enough digits, so what you need to do is put the decimal and add 2 0. This is called annexing the 0. And then 4 goes into 1 0 time. You bring the decimal up. 4 goes into 10 twice. 4 times 2 is 8. 10 times 10, so take away 8 is 2. Drop to 0. 4 goes into 25 time. And my final solution is 1/4 is equivalent to 25 hundredths, and if we're going to convert this into a percent, which is the next section, you know this is 25%. Kind of makes sense. 1 out of 4 is a quarter. So this is an example of a terminating decimal because it just stops at the 5. It doesn't continue on, it doesn't repeat, it just stops at the 5. This next one, the fraction of a nitrogen in a chemical sample is 5/8. Write the fraction as a decimal. So now we're going to practice using the calculator. Again, the trick here is to divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay, so what you need to do is use your calculator, just like we did with decimals. You input the numerator first. In this case, it's 5 divided by 8, and you get this number, which is 625 thousandths. If you ask yourself, is this repeating or terminating? This would be considered terminating because it just stops again at after the 5. So that is how you convert a fraction into a decimal. Alright, so now we're going to look at these two numbers. The first one says 5.355555555, and then these three little dots. We'll talk more about these dots when we get to patterns and sequences and random change, but it really means that it continues on forever. So these two types of number are called repeating decimals. Why? Because you guessed it. It just continues on. But the trick is you have to identify the repeating pattern, and once you've identified the repeating pattern, you put the repeating bar over the part of the decimal that just repeats. So a common one is 1/3. 1/3 is into a decimal will look like 0.3333333 repeating. Well, really you can just put 0.3 and then the little line above it, and that means that this decimal repeats non-stop. So repeating decimals are decimals that have one or more blocks of digits that repeat. Is 2/3 a repeating decimal? Well, let's use our calculator and see. Again, to convert 2/3 as a fraction, 2/3 into a decimal, you divide the numerator, so it looks something like this. 2 by 3, so you're dividing 2 by 3. Remember, this is also a division problem, so the numerator, denominator. Again, if you want to do it by hand, you have to put annex a 0, so put the decimal in 2 zeros, or you can use the calculator today, so 2 divided by 3, and you get this. And you get 0.666667, and this is where the calculator comes in. Because my decimal keeps going on forever, the calculator tends to round the last digit up so that that's the computer language that tells it to stop. So when you see something like this, it really means that it's just 0.6 repeating. Other cases may be 0.66 repeating. You can write 0.66 repeating, but that really just repetitive. You can just write 0.66 repeating. So is 2/3 a repeating decimal? 2/3 is a repeating decimal of 0.6 repeating. Okay. Is 3/11 a repeating decimal? Well, again, quickest way to go to your calculator, 3 divided by 11, and you get this sequence. You get 0.272727, so what's repeating? 0, 2, 7 repeating. So yes, it is a repeating decimal. So repeating decimals and terminating decimal is a special type of number called rational number, and we'll talk more about rational and non-rational number in the next unit. But just know that repeating and terminating decimals are called rational numbers. Did you know? You can write a terminating decimal as a fraction or a mixed number by writing the digits to the right of the decimal point as a fraction. So for example, if I have the number 1 and 325 thousandths, to write this as a fraction, you leave the 1 alone, and then you look at the decimal. So the decimal is 0.325. You look at the last number to the right of the decimal, which is a 5, and then you tell me what place that is. You get a 10, hundreds, and a thousand. So really, this looks like 325 over 1,000. Why is it over 1,000? Because it's over the thousandths place. So you want to check your work, you can literally take 325 divide by 1,000, and you should get 325 thousandths, which I did. So I know I set up the decimal into the fraction correctly. And then from here, you need to simplify your fraction or reduce it down. So you leave the 1 alone, and then you play with the 325 over 1,000. You find a common denominator. Well, you can go by any number you want that goes into both of this evenly. So I know that this is 5, this is a 0, so I know that 5 goes into both of them, so I'm going to divide the top and the bottom by 5, which gives me, you can go back to your calculator, 325 divided by 5, I get 65. So this was 65. And I know 1,000 divided by 5, you can do that mental math, check your work on the calculator, it should be 200. Again, it ends in a 5, this ends in 200, so you know 5 can go into it one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and divide both by 5 one more time. You can use your calculator or you can do it mentally, it's up to you. But I know that 65 divided by 5 is 13, and 200 divided by 5, let's make this better. I know that it goes into it 40 times. Okay, you check your work. 200 divided by 5 should equals 40 times. So, and that can't go any lower. So my final answer is 1 and 325,000 is equal to 1 and 13/40. How do I check my work? Well, if we divide 13 by 40, we should get 0.325, which we do. So this is equivalent of each other. Again, the trick is to find the last digit to the right of the decimal and count starting with tens, hundreds, thousands. Okay, so write each decimal as a mixed number in simplest form. Again, 1, leave the 1 alone because that's the whole. 364, again the 4 is in the thousands, so you put that over 1,000. You reduce that down. 2, 48, well this one's not thousands, it's tens and hundreds, so you just put that over 100. And 3, 6 over 10. You can reduce each down. You can find a common denominator or common multiple, between both of them. You can go with 2 and just keep breaking it down until you can't go anymore. Next, we're going to talk about ordering fractions and decimals. So ordering from greatest to least. You have 2, 2 and 5500ths, 2 and 6 and 18ths. So the easiest thing is to look at what you have right here. You have a whole number, an integer, you have a number and a decimal, and then you have a number with a fraction. You have two choices. You can convert everything into the same form, such as everything into fractions, or you can convert everything into a decimal. I personally like to convert all my fractions to a decimal before I start comparing. So since this is already 2, leave it alone. This is 2 and 5500ths, leave that alone. So I need to convert 2 and 6/18ths into a decimal by dividing 6 divided by 18. And so this simplified down to a decimal is 2 and 3/10 repeating. And then we just order from least to greatest. So obviously 2 is going to be the least. Then 2.33 and then 2.55 is what it should be. Let's check our work. There we go. It looks something like that. And that's how you quickly compare fractions and decimal. You must change them all into the same format. This last one. In a survey about pets, 2/5 of students prefer cats, 3/300ths prefer dogs, 3 and 25 prefer birds, and 1/1500ths prefer fish. List the choices in order of preference. So again, everything is either decimals or fractions, so I'm going to convert all my fractions into decimals. So the first thing I'm going to do is convert 2/5 into a decimal. So 2/5, oops, excuse me. So 2/5 into the decimal. You can quickly do some mental math, and you know that 5 is a multiple of 10. I'm going to show you another way of doing it. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2, and I get 4/10. So that is 0.4. So 2/5 is 0.4. 0.33 is already a decimal, so we're good. 3 and 25ths, I can't really do in my head, so we go to your calculator. 3 divided by 25. And you get 1200ths. So now we can list them from least to greatest. So the least will be 3 out of 25. And then we're going to go 1500ths. And then we're going to go 0.33. And then we're going to go 4/10. And that's how you list fractions and decimals from least to greatest. You convert them all into the same format. Could I have changed those decimals into a fraction? Sure, I can. You know, if you wanted to change 3300ths into a fraction, all you need to know is that 3 is in the hundreds place, so it really means 33 over 100. But I really can't reduce that down anymore. So that's about it. Okay, so that's all I have for today. So let's get busy working on the bookwork. If there are any questions and I'm not in the class, just send me an email or ask the sub that's in the room. Okay?